At my sister's memorial service, my daughter pulled me into a quiet corner and shoved an old envelope into my hands. Dad, you need to read this now. The handwriting on it made my blood run cold. It was my sister's handwriting, the woman who had vanished 13 months ago. Inside it said, "Don't trust the first person who reaches for the assets." And just a few minutes later, he walked up, smiling. Maybe we should talk about the inheritance. I'm truly grateful you're here with me. Before we begin, drop a quick comment and tell me, what are you doing while you listen? Driving, working, or just taking a moment for yourself? Your presence here matters. A quick note, some details in this story are fictionalized for storytelling. What truly matters is the lesson at its heart. The tie wouldn't cooperate. I stood in front of the mirror in my dressing room, fingers working the black silk for the third time, and I still couldn't get the knot right. My hands weren't shaking, I want to be clear about that. Nolan Mercer does not shake. But there was something wrong with my fingers that morning, some disconnect between what my brain told them to do and what they actually did. And after the fourth attempt, I just gripped the fabric and stopped. I am dressing for my sister's memorial service. My sister, who I do not believe is dead. I said it to myself in the mirror, the way you say something out loud to test whether it sounds as insane as it feels. It didn't sound insane. It sounded like the only true thing in the room. Celeste. Rowan disappeared 13 months ago. September 15th, 2023, a Tuesday. 8:40 in the evening, last seen leaving Mercer Holdings through the main lobby. No body, no note, no goodbye. Just the particular silence of a person-shaped bowl in the world, the kind that gets louder the longer it stays empty. I finally got the knot right on the fifth try. Downstairs, Vivian was already at the breakfast table. She was dressed in a charcoal gray suit, hair pinned back, lipstick the color of dried roses. She looked composed in the way that expensive furniture looks composed, perfectly arranged and not quite warm. "You look tired," she said, not looking up from her coffee. "I didn't sleep well. You should take something tonight." She turned a page of the newspaper. "Dr. Reeves said the prescription was fine to use as needed." "I'll think about it." She finally looked at me, then a quick assessing glance, the kind a person gives when they're checking a box rather than seeing you. "The car's coming at 9:30. Damien called this morning. He wants to speak with you before the service." Something moved in my chest. Not quite alarm, more like the feeling you get when you step onto ice and hear it creak under your boot, not broken yet, but worth paying attention to. "What about?" I asked. "Company matters." She returned to her newspaper. "He said it's not urgent, just when you have a moment." Company matters. Celeste had been gone 13 months, and her husband wanted to discuss company matters on the morning of her memorial. I picked up my coffee cup and said nothing, which is different from having nothing to say. I stood at the kitchen window while I drank it, looking out at the back lawn. October in Greenwich. The sugar maple near the stone wall had gone the color of a lit match, and the wind was pulling leaves off it in slow, deliberate handfuls. I'd planted that tree with Celeste the year we moved our offices to Connecticut. She'd made me do the digging because she said she had a bad back, and I had a guilty conscience about missing her birthday that year, which was both unfair and completely accurate. We built this together, Nolan. I could still hear her voice on the day we incorporated Mercer Holdings, standing in that cramped downtown office, signing papers on a desk that wobbled her pen, moving across the page like she was signing a treaty. "Don't ever let anyone take it from us." I rinsed my cup in the sink. "I'm going to wait for Marcus out front," I said. Vivian didn't look up. "Don't forget your coat. It's cold." Marcus Doyle had been my driver for 11 years. He was 63 years old, built like a man who had once been an athlete and hadn't entirely stopped. And he had the particular gift of knowing when to talk and when not to. When he pulled up to the front of the house and stepped out to open the door, he looked at me with an expression I couldn't immediately name. Not pity, not sympathy exactly. Something more like concern with restraint, the way a doctor looks at a patient whose test results haven't come back yet. "Good morning, Mr. Mercer." "Morning, Marcus." He held the door. I got in. He closed it, walked around to the driver's side, and settled in. He put the car in drive, but didn't move immediately. Just sat there, hands on the wheel, eyes on the gate. "Mr. Mercer," he said finally. "Yes. There's—" He stopped, adjusted his grip on the wheel. "There's something I've been carrying for a while now, about the night Ms. Rowan disappeared." My whole body went still. Not the stillness of shock, the stillness of a man who has been waiting for something and suddenly hears it start. I wasn't sure it was my place to say anything, Marcus continued, eyes still forward. I didn't know who to trust, and for a while I told myself it might not mean what I thought it meant. Marcus, my voice came out steadier than I felt. Look at me. He turned, his jaw was tight, his eyes direct. Tell me, I said. He held my gaze for a moment, then gave one slow, deliberate nod. Tonight, he said quietly, after the service, not here. He glanced toward the house just briefly, just enough. Somewhere we can talk properly. I looked back at the house, at the front windows, at the curtain on the second floor that had shifted slightly and was now still. Vivian's bedroom window. Tonight? I agreed. Marcus put the car in drive. We pulled out through the gate, turned onto the road, and the house disappeared behind the hedgerow. I watched the last of it go. The roofline, the chimney, the maple in the side yard, and felt something crystallize in my chest. Not grief, not the soft, shapeless sorrow I'd been carrying for 13 months. Something harder, something with edges. When we reached the bottom of the hill, I spoke without turning from the window. Marcus, when we get to the church, I need you to stay close. Not inside, just outside where you can see the door. Understood, sir. And if anyone asks where I've gone at any point during the reception, you stepped out for air, he said. You do that sometimes, especially at events like this. Good. The church came into view through the windshield, St. Andrew's stone walls, and a slate roof, the parking lot already filling up with black cars, and standing at the front steps in a charcoal coat, arms crossed against the cold, was Elise, my daughter, 29 years old, sharp as a blade, and twice as careful. She was scanning the arriving cars with the expression she got when she'd found something in a contract that nobody else had caught yet. She spotted our car, walked straight toward it. Marcus barely had the door open before she was at my elbow, her hand gripping my arm, her voice dropping to just above a whisper. Dad. Her eyes were pale and serious and not remotely grieving. There's something you need to see before we go in. Elise pulled me around the side of the church, away from the arriving guests, into a narrow stone passage between the main building and the garden wall. The wind came through it cold and sharp, carrying the smell of wet leaves and old mortar. She reached into her coat and produced an envelope. It was not new. The paper had gone the color of weak tea, the edges soft with handling, and my name was written across the front, in handwriting I would have recognized anywhere neat, slightly left-leaning the capital N with that particular extra loop Celeste had never managed to unlearn. My throat tightened so fast it almost hurt. Where did you get this? I asked. Sophie Bennett. Elise's voice was careful, measured. She was watching my face the way people watch a glass that's been filled too full. Celeste gave it to her before she disappeared, with instructions only give it to you on the day of the memorial, not before. Sophie said she almost called you a dozen times this past year, but Celeste had been very specific. I turned the envelope over in my hands, still sealed, my name, her handwriting, and nothing else. How long have you had it? I asked. Sophie gave it to me last night. Elise pressed her lips together. I didn't open it, Dad. I thought about it. But it has your name on it. The organ inside the church had started low resonant, the particular sound of ceremony beginning, whether you're ready or not. I slid my thumb under the flap. Inside a single folded sheet, the same aged paper. I opened it. The handwriting was smaller than the envelope, more compressed, like someone who had a lot to say and wasn't sure how much time they had. Nolan, don't trust the first one who reaches for the company. I found something. I should have told you sooner. I'm sorry. See, I read it once, then again, then a third time, not because I hadn't understood it, but because each pass felt like pressing on a bruise necessary and clarifying in a way that hurt. The first one who reaches for the company. Dad? Elise's hand came to my arm. What does it say? I folded the paper, tucked it into my breast pocket against my chest. Come on, I said. We're going to be late. She grabbed my wrist. Nolan? I looked at her. Her eyes were wet, jaw set. What does it say? A beat. 2, then she knew something was wrong. Before she disappeared, she knew. I patted her hand once. That's all I'm going to say right now. Let's go in. The memorial service was exactly what a memorial service for a woman like Celeste Rowan should have been, and also everything she would have found unbearable. The flowers were white and excessive. The music was chosen by committee. The eulogies ran long. Damien Cross spoke second. He stood at the podium in a charcoal suit that fit him too well for a man who was supposed to be in mourning, and he spoke about Celeste with the fluency of someone who had practiced this speech until the emotion sounded real. His voice broke at the right moments. His eyes went red at the right moments. The entire performance was polished to a finish that should have moved me and instead made the note in my breast pocket feel like it was burning straight through the fabric. I watched him from the third pew. I watched the way he held the edges of the podium. I watched the way his eyes moved across the congregation, not in grief, I realized, but in inventory, counting faces, noting who was there. Julian sat 2 rows ahead of me. Celeste's son, 31 years old, dark-haired with his father's jaw, and I had always hoped his mother's judgment. He sat straight-backed and still staring at a fixed point on the wall behind the altar, and he did not cry. Not once. Not for a single moment of the entire service. People grieve differently, I know that. But there is a specific stillness that comes from absence of feeling, and a different stillness that comes from suppression. And I had known Julian Cross his entire life, and what I saw in him that morning was not grief being held back. It was the controlled blankness of a person managing information. After the service, the reception had moved to Mercer Holdings. The 18th floor catered impeccable, the kind of gathering where people drink white wine and say she would have wanted this about a woman they knew professionally but never really knew at all. I excused myself to the balcony. The city spread out below me, midday Manhattan gray and silver and indifferent, the kind of view that made human drama feel appropriately small. I took the note from my pocket and read it one more time. The first one who reaches for the company. The balcony door opened behind me. Beautiful city. Damien's voice warm, familiar with that particular undertone of a man who considered warmth a tool. He came to stand beside me at the railing, close enough that I could smell his cologne. Sandalwood and something sharper underneath. She loved this view, you know. Celeste. She used to say Manhattan looked like a circuit board from up here. She said that, yes. His hand came to my shoulder firm, steady, the grip of a man accustomed to directing others through physical contact. She would have wanted Mercer Holdings to stay strong. You know that better than anyone. A pause, perfectly timed. Which is why I think we need to talk about the management transition. Get things stabilized for the shareholders before the quarter closes. I know the timing is difficult, but... Of course, Damien. I turned to face him and I smiled. It was not a difficult smile to produce. I had been smiling at people I didn't trust my entire professional life. Let's find some time this week. His shoulders dropped a fraction, relief quickly masked. Good. That's good. Gregory can have the paperwork ready by Thursday. Whenever works for you. He clapped my shoulder once and went back inside. I turned back to the view. Below 20 floors down, a yellow cab cut across 3 lanes without signaling and disappeared around a corner. I put the note back in my pocket. When I turned to go inside, I nearly walked into Vivian. She was standing 3 feet from the balcony door, champagne glass in hand, and for a fraction of a second before her face arranged itself into an expression of wifely concern, she was looking at me with something else entirely, something that calculated distance. There you are, she said warmly. I was looking for you. Just getting some air. She tucked her hand into my arm and steered me gently back toward the reception. Her perfume was the same one she'd worn for years, something floral and familiar that I had always associated with coming home. Standing beside her now, I felt it the way you feel a wrong note in a song you know by heart. Not loud, but impossible to unhear. Behind us, I caught Marcus at the edge of the room. He was looking at me. He gave the smallest possible nod. Tonight, his eyes said. Tonight, I'll tell you. I nodded back just as small and let Vivian lead me into the crowd. Marcus chose a diner on Post Road, the kind of place with vinyl booths and coffee that came in a pot left on the table without asking. We got there at 10:45 after the reception had thinned out, and Vivian had taken a car home with a headache that I suspected was strategic. The diner was half empty. A ceiling fan turned slowly overhead even though it was October. Marcus picked the booth farthest from the window and sat with his back to the wall. I hadn't seen him nervous before. In 11 years, I had seen Marcus Doyle tired. I had seen him frustrated in traffic. I had seen him quietly furious, the time a valet scratched the town car. But not nervous. His hands wrapped around his coffee mug and stayed there like he needed something to hold. "Tell me what you saw," I said. He exhaled slow, deliberate, a man who had been rehearsing this. "The night Ms. Rowan disappeared. September 15th. I was on overnight call. You had an early flight the next morning, so I stayed in the basement lot. I fell asleep in the car around midnight." He paused. "I woke up at 2:47. I remember the time because I checked my phone when I heard the elevator." "Which elevator?" "The service elevator. B level. It doesn't sound like the main ones. There's a mechanical catch at the bottom, like a cough." His jaw tightened. I looked up and I saw Damien Cross come out of the stairwell door. Not the elevator. He'd taken the stairs from B1. He was moving fast. He had a large duffel bag over one shoulder. Marcus's knuckles went white around the mug. He used the south exit, the one without cameras on the outside. My chest felt like something heavy had been set down on it. "You're certain it was Damien?" "Mr. Mercer." His eyes met mine, steady and pained. "I've driven that man to 47 dinners over 6 years. I know the way he walks." "Why didn't you—" I stopped myself, breathed. "I'm not asking that to blame you, Marcus. I genuinely want to understand." His face crumpled at the edges. Not crying, but the expression of a man fighting it back, hard. "Who was I going to tell his wife had just vanished? You were—" He looked down at his coffee. "You weren't yourself those weeks, sir. You came in one morning and you sat in the back seat for 20 minutes before you realized we hadn't moved. I didn't know what to do with what I'd seen, and the longer I waited, the harder it got. My throat ached. Not at him, at the whole ugly geometry of it, at how carefully everything had been arranged so that the people who might have spoken had no clear place to speak. "You're telling me now," I said. "That matters." He nodded once tight. Then he reached into his jacket and set a small notebook on the table. Black cover spiral-bound the pages, dense with his careful handwriting. Over a year of dates, times, locations, I started writing things down before she disappeared. Something felt wrong earlier than September. Every time I drove Vivian somewhere she didn't mention to you. Every time Damien's car was parked on our street outside normal visit hours. He pushed it across to me. I didn't know what it added up to, but I wrote it down anyway. I picked up the notebook, opened it to a random page. Vivian Damien's office, 11:15 a.m. March 4th. Vivian, The Carlisle, 2:30 p.m. June 17th. Damien's car, our street, 11 p.m. to 1. a.m. August 9th. The diner felt very quiet all of a sudden. "Thank you, Marcus," I managed. My voice came out rougher than I intended. The next morning I went to see Sophie Bennett. She lived on West 84th 4th floor walk-up, and she buzzed me in without asking who it was over the intercom, which told me she'd been expecting this visit longer than I had been planning it. Her apartment was small and careful, the kind of space kept tidy by someone who needed control over something. Celeste's photo was on the bookshelf, the two of them at some company event 5 years ago. Celeste, mid-laugh, Sophie beaming beside her. Sophie opened the door, and her eyes went red the moment she saw me. Not tears yet, just the immediate, helpless reddening of someone whose grief was still right at the surface. "Mr. Mercer," she said, her voice catching. "I'm glad you came." "I got the envelope," I said. "Thank you for keeping it." She pressed her lips together hard and stepped back to let me in. We sat at her kitchen table. She had tea ready. She'd been expecting me. I was right about that. Her hands shook slightly as she set the cups down. "She was frightened," Sophie said without me asking. "The week before she was genuinely frightened, and Celeste—" "Rowan was not a woman who frightened easily. She told me—" Her voice broke and she pressed the back of her hand against her mouth for a moment. "She told me if anything happened to her, I should not let them close her office right away." I didn't understand what she meant. I thought she was being dramatic. A tear spilled down her cheek and she wiped it away almost angrily. "I should have pushed harder." "You couldn't have known, Sophie." "I should have—" She stopped, set both hands flat on the table. "I have something for you." She got up, went to a drawer, came back with a folded paper, a scan slightly blurred at the edges. She printed this the day before she disappeared. It was in her outbox, never sent. I unfolded it. "Damien knows I found the accounts. I need more time." 7 words that hit me like a door swung open in a dark hallway. She mentioned something else. Sophie said, watching my face carefully. Something strange. She said this wasn't the first time someone had tried to bleed Mercer Holdings. She said it happened once, before years ago, before Damien was even in the picture. Sophie shook her head slowly. She never told me who. She said she'd handled it herself, and she'd been wrong to think she could handle this the same way. Before Damien, I folded the scan, filed the words somewhere cold and careful in the back of my mind. On the walk back to the car, I passed a pharmacy on Columbus Avenue and stopped in front of the window without knowing why. I stood there looking at my reflection in the glass. 57 years old gray at the temples, a man in a good coat who had just learned that his wife's car had been parked outside his brother-in-law's building at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday in August. You married the company Nolan. Vivian, 3 years into our marriage, her voice low and flat at the end of a night I'd worked through again. Not me. And Damien had been there in those years, dropping by, being available, being present in all the ways I had failed to be. I started walking again. Behind me, my reflection disappeared. Damien's meeting request came in at 7:15 Thursday morning before I'd finished my first coffee, which I suspected was deliberate. The subject line read, Mercer Holdings Interim Stabilization Discussion. Gregory Shaw was copied. Claire Holloway was copied. The conference room was booked for 10 a.m. Everything about it was efficient, organized, and made my skin crawl. I wore a tie I didn't care about and arrived 3 minutes late on purpose. The 20th floor conference room had floor-to-ceiling windows and a mahogany table long enough to seat 20. Damien was already there, jacket on posture, easy the way men sit when they want you to know they're comfortable in a room. Gregory Shaw sat to his right, 60-something, silver-haired, with the smooth, unhurried manner of a lawyer who had spent decades making dangerous documents sound like standard procedure. Nolan? Damien rose and extended his hand. His grip was firm and warm. Thank you for making the time. Of course. I shook it, looked him in the eye, smiled. Family first. Something flickered behind his eyes just for a fraction of a second. Satisfaction, I thought. The kind that came from believing a thing was going according to plan. Gregory slid a bound document across the table. Cream-colored cover, Mercer Holdings letterhead, 40-something pages. Standard interim management protocol, Gregory said in the voice of a man who had said those exact words many times before. Given the uncertainty around Celeste's legal status, the board needs clarity on operational authority. This simply establishes a temporary structure while things are resolved. Resolved, I repeated. Administratively resolved, Gregory said smoothly. The declaration of presumed death is a legal formality at this stage. It allows the company to function without ambiguity. Damien leaned forward. Nolan, I know this is painful, but Celeste would have wanted Mercer Holdings protected. You know that better than I do. His voice dropped warm, intimate, concerned. I'm not trying to take anything from anyone. I'm trying to make sure what she built doesn't fall apart while we're all still grieving. I looked down at the document. I turned pages, slowly reading, nodding occasionally, performing the expression of a tired man, processing too much. My eyes went everywhere they were supposed to go, and also to page 34, which I had been told to find. It was there. Paragraph 6, subsection C, buried under 3 paragraphs of procedural language about shareholder voting rights. The word guardianship appeared exactly once. The phrase cognitive capacity evaluation appeared once more in the following line. I kept my face arranged. This is a lot to absorb, I said, closing the document. Give me a few days to go through it. Of course. Damien sat back. Take your time. Just the board meeting is the 8th, so if we could have signatures by the 5th at the latest. I'll do my best, I said. Gregory gave me his card. Damien walked me to the elevator, personally hand on my shoulder, asking about my sleep, my appetite, whether I was seeing anyone for the stress. The performance was immaculate. The elevator doors closed. I stood alone in the descending car and let my face do what it had been waiting to do for 45 minutes. A jaw-tightening eyes going hard, the particular cold fury of a man who has just been shown exactly how someone intends to destroy him and had to sit there and nod through it. I sent the document to Elise before the elevator reached the lobby. She called me at 2:15 p.m. I was in my car parked in a garage on 47th Street, engine off. Dad? Her voice was wound tight as a spring. Page 34. I saw it. This isn't an interim management protocol. Her words came fast-clipped, each one precise. This is a competency trap. If you sign this, you're consenting to a legal framework that allows them to petition the court to declare you cognitively incapacitated. Do you understand what that means? They could strip your voting rights. They could remove you from the board. All of it perfectly legal because you handed them the mechanism yourself. My hand tightened on the phone. I understand. Dad. Her voice cracked not much, just at the edge. The sound of someone who was furious on their father's behalf, and frightened and trying not to be either. How long has this been building? Long enough, I said. What do you want to do? I want you to find me a forensic accountant. Someone completely outside the company. Someone Gregory Shaw has never heard of. Okay? She was already moving. I could hear it. Okay, I have someone in mind. Give me 24 hours. Good. I paused. Elise. Yeah. Don't tell anyone. Not the office. Not your friends. A beat. Not your mother. A sharp intake of breath on her end. Then quietly, how bad is it? I don't know yet, I said. That's what I need to find out. That evening, Vivian made salmon for dinner. We ate at opposite ends of the dining table, which seated 8, which had always struck me as one of the loneliest architectural choices in our marriage. She talked about a charity luncheon. She talked about a friend's renovation in Darien. She talked about the weather turning cold. I answered when answered was required, and I watched her hands. At 8:45, she brought my medication to the table, 2 small white pills on a porcelain dish, the kind you'd rest a ring on. She'd been doing this for months. Blood pressure, she said. Dr. Reeves's recommendation. Here, honey. She set the dish in front of me. Her voice was soft, domestic, entirely ordinary. I looked at the pills. Round, white, unremarkable. Thank you, Viv. I picked them up, put them to my lips, tipped my head back. She carried the dish back to the kitchen, and I heard the tap run. When she came back, the pills were in my breast pocket, wrapped in a corner of my napkin. I had not taken a single one in 3 days. I'd been folding them into tissues, into napkin corners, into the lining of my coat pocket, accumulating them in a small envelope I'd taped to the back of my desk drawer. Because 2 nights ago I had woken at 3 a.m., and for 40 minutes I could not remember the name of our first company attorney, a man I had known for 16 years, and I had lain in the dark and thought about all the other small gaps that had appeared in the past 4 months. The forgotten appointments, the words that arrived late, the mornings when my head felt packed in cotton. I had been attributing it to grief. Now I attributed it to something else entirely. After dinner, I went to my study and called Elise. One more thing, I said when she picked up. What? I need a doctor, someone outside the practice Vivian manages, someone who does toxicology screening. I kept my voice level. And Elise, I need you to understand that what I'm about to ask you to test is something I've been swallowing every night for months. The silence on her end lasted exactly 2 seconds. Then, I'll have a name for you, I'm mourning. I hung up and sat at my desk in the dark for a long time, looking at the small envelope in my hand, thinking about how much patience a person could need, and how much I was going to have to find. I stopped taking the pills on a Tuesday. By the following Monday, I was waking up at odd hours. Again, 1 a.m., 2 a.m., 3. The way I used to before Vivian started managing my sleep, with her little porcelain dish and her soft voice and her 2 white tablets. I hadn't realized how deeply I'd stopped waking up at night until I started again. At 1:17 a.m. on October 28th, I opened my eyes, and the bed beside me was empty. Not just empty, cold. I lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house. The heating system clicked and breathed. Somewhere outside, a car passed on the road below, and from the far end of the hallway, very faint, barely there, a voice. Vivian's voice. I got up without turning on any lights. The hallway was dark, except for a thin line of gold under the door of the small study. At the end, the room Vivian used for what she called her personal correspondence, which I had never examined, because I had been a man who trusted his wife. I moved on bare feet, staying close to the wall where the floorboards didn't flex. The door was not quite closed. 3 inches of gap, maybe 4. I stood beside it, and I listened. He's starting to ask questions, Damien. Her voice was low and clipped, stripped of every warm register she used with me. This was a different voice entirely, the voice of a woman conducting business. He talked to Sophie Bennett 2 days ago. A pause. Then Damien's voice thinned through the phone speaker. How close is he? Close enough that I'm concerned. A sharp exhale. If he finds Rachel before we move the Cayman accounts, then we accelerate. Damien's voice hardened. Get him to sign the documents this week. Push harder if you have to. Use the medication double the dosage if he's been resistant. My heart did not race. That's the thing I remember most clearly. My heart did not race, my hands did not shake, my breathing did not change. It was as though my body had been quietly preparing for this moment for months, and had already done its panicking in private. And after he signs, Vivian asked. A pause, longer than the others. Then we won't need him anymore, Damien said. I pressed my back against the hallway wall. The plaster was cold through my shirt. I looked up at the ceiling, and in the dark, I allowed myself exactly 5 seconds to feel it. The full, crashing, devastating weight of 22 years of marriage, compressing into a single sentence spoken in a voice I had never heard my wife use before. Then we won't need him anymore. 5 seconds. Then I breathed out, slowly pushed myself off the wall, and walked back down the hall in my bare feet. I got back into bed. I arranged myself on my side, facing away from her side of the room, and I closed my eyes. She came back 8 minutes later. I heard the door open. Her footsteps careful, practiced the particular quiet of a person who has learned to move through a shared bedroom without waking the other person. The sheets shifted as she slid in. The mattress adjusted. Her breathing slowed within 4 minutes. Controlled even the sleep of someone with an untroubled conscience, or the performance of it. And lying there in the dark, I realized I genuinely could not tell which one it was. That was perhaps the worst part. After 22 years, I could not tell. 22 years. We had picked out the wallpaper in the front hallway together. We had argued laughing about the color of the guest bathroom for an entire weekend. I had held her hand in a hospital room when her mother was dying, and she had wept against my shoulder, and I had believed every single tear. I believe them still, actually. I don't think the grief was performed. I think people are capable of feeling genuine things and doing monstrous things in the same lifetime, sometimes simultaneously, and that is a much harder truth to sit with than simple villainy. My jaw ached. I'd been clenching it. When Vivian's breathing had been steady for 20 minutes, I opened my eyes. The ceiling was faintly gray with early pre-dawn light filtering around the curtain edges. I thought about Celeste. I thought about a duffel bag and a service exit at 2:47 in the morning. I thought about an email that read, Damien knows I found the accounts. I thought about a competency evaluation quietly filed with the court months before anyone had asked me to sign anything. They built this slowly, I thought, patiently, over years, which meant I was going to have to be more patient than both of them combined. In the morning, Vivian set the porcelain dish in front of me at 6:55, right on schedule. 2 white pills. The same 2 white pills she'd been setting in front of me for months, except that Dr. Naomi Keller had confirmed 3 days ago that they were not blood pressure medication. One was a low-grade benzodiazepine. The other was a compound used in early cognitive impairment studies. Long-term use, Dr. Keller had said, her voice going carefully neutral in the way doctors went. Carefully neutral when they were furious would produce memory lapses. Concentration difficulty and conveniently results, consistent with early-stage dementia on a standard cognitive assessment. Here, honey. Viviana's voice was warm as coffee, soft as the kitchen light. She was wearing the blue robe I'd given her for her birthday 3 years ago. She looked domestic and familiar and like someone I had loved very much. I smiled at her. I picked up the pills, brought them to my lips. She turned to pour her own coffee. I put them in my pocket. Thank you, Viv. I folded my hands around my mug. I don't know what I'd do without you. She smiled over her shoulder, bright, genuine, the smile I'd fallen in love with at a fundraiser in 2002. You'd be a mess, she said warmly. You'd forget everything. You're probably right, I said, and I held her gaze and smiled back and thought, one of us is an exceptionally good actor. I just spent 22 years assuming it was me. The offices of Evelyn Ross occupied the 14th floor of a building on Lexington Avenue that had no Mercer Holdings connection, no shared tenants, and no reason for my name to appear in any visitor log linked to Gregory Shaw's network. I had chosen Evelyn 12 years ago because she was the kind of lawyer who read every page of every document before she spoke and she charged accordingly, and she was worth every dollar. She was waiting for me when I stepped off the elevator. No assistant visible, no receptionist at the front desk. Just Evelyn in a charcoal blazer, reading glasses pushed up on her head, opening the door to her conference room before I'd finished saying her name. Vivian had been watching for compliance, the foggy, slowed version of me that the pills produced. She wasn't watching for a man who had quietly returned to himself. That was the only advantage I had. "I've been waiting for this meeting," she said before I'd sat down. I looked at her. "How long?" "3 weeks." She laid a manila folder on the table between us and opened it, a single document inside, flagged with 3 colored tabs. Gregory Shaw filed a preliminary motion for a cognitive competency evaluation 6 weeks ago. Quiet filing, no press, no notifications to you directly, because at this stage it doesn't legally require them. She tapped the first tab. "He used medical documentation I don't recognize. I've been trying to trace the source. My best guess is a physician whose license is not in New York State." The coffee in front of me went untouched. My chest felt like a fist closing. "He's been building it for months," I said. "Longer." Evelyn's voice was precise and measured and professionally controlled, but her eyes were sharp with something that looked a great deal like anger on my behalf. "Nolan, whoever put this together, did it carefully. This isn't opportunism. This is architecture." "I know." I straightened in my chair. "Which is why I need to build something faster. What can you do?" She almost smiled, not warmly, but with the particular satisfaction of a lawyer being asked to do what they were actually built for. "I can construct a counterstructure, a complete beneficial ownership declaration, a shareholder protection addendum, and a revocable trust arrangement that removes your assets from any guardianship petition before it can be acted on." She turned a legal pad toward me, dense with handwritten notes, arrows, brackets. Essentially, by the time Gregory Shaw tries to use that competency filing, every asset will already be sitting behind a wall he didn't know existed. "How long?" 2 weeks. Maybe less. "Good." I pulled Marcus's notebook from my inside pocket and set it on the table. "And I need this documented properly. Dates, times, vehicle registrations, everything corroborated." Evelyn opened it, scanned the first page, and her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She turned to the entry for June 17th. "Vivian of the Carlisle, 2:30 p.m. She didn't say anything, but the way she closed the notebook told me she understood exactly what it represented. The following Thursday, Elise brought Rachel Lynn to a coffee shop in Carroll Gardens that smelled like cardamom and had no cameras visible from any of the seating areas. Elise had clearly briefed Rachel in advance, because when Rachel sat down, she looked at me with the direct, unsentimental gaze of someone who had already decided whether to take the job. Rachel Lynn was 36 years old, 5'4", and appeared to own exclusively gray and navy clothing. She had the kind of stillness that came from spending long hours with spreadsheets in quiet rooms. She opened a laptop that had seen better years and set a legal pad beside it. "Tell me what you know," she said, no preamble. I told her about the offshore transfers Sophie had referenced, about the shell companies with art exhibition names, about Claire Holloway's position as CFO and her proximity to every financial decision in the past 18 months. Rachel took notes without looking up. When I finished, she tapped her pen against the pad 3 times in quick succession, a thinking gesture, I gathered, not nervousness. 2 weeks, she said. "Give me rate access to the accounts you still control in 2 weeks. If the money moved, I'll find where it went. And if someone inside the company notices you're looking..." She looked up at me, then flat matter-of-fact, completely unintimidated. "Mr. Mercer, I once traced $41 million through 11 jurisdictions for a DOJ case. I know how to look at things without being seen looking." Elise beside me pressed her lips together to suppress what would have been a deeply inappropriate smile given the circumstances. That afternoon, I went down to the security level at Mercer Holdings and found Ethan Cole in the monitoring room alone, reviewing footage from the lobby cameras, with the methodical attention of a man who took his job personally. Ethan was 51, ex-Army, and had the quality I valued most in the people around me. Just then, he was loyal to the institution, not to the people who currently occupied it. When I explained what I needed, he put down his coffee and gave me his complete attention. "I need you to go back to the night of September 15th last year," I said. "Specifically, the garage level. I know the footage was deleted." Ethan's expression shifted, something tightening around his eyes. 42 minutes were wiped, he said. I flagged it at the time. Nobody followed up. A pause, and something flickered across his face that looked very much like guilt. I should have pushed harder. I need you to try to recover what's there, whatever fragments exist. I held his gaze. And I need you to sweep every space I use regularly for listening devices, starting with my office today. He nodded once, no hesitation. Done. Then he leaned forward slightly. Nolan, how bad is this? I thought about the midnight hallway, about Vivian's business voice, about a competency filing that had been sitting in a courthouse for 6 weeks without my knowledge. Bad enough that I need you to trust me completely, and tell absolutely nobody what you're doing, I said. Not Claire Holloway, not Gregory Shaw's contacts, not anyone who comes to you from Damien Cross's direction. Ethan's chin came up slightly. Understood. Good. On the way home that evening, I sat in the back of Marcus's car and looked out at the November city, the last of the leaves, gone from the park trees, the streets gray and purposeful, people moving fast, with their collars up against the wind. I thought about Celeste, saying we built this together, don't let anyone take it from us. I thought about Sophie's haunted face, and Evelyn's careful anger, and Rachel's flat, fearless gaze, and Elisa's jaw set hard against tears she refused to shed. I have people, I thought. Real ones. I pulled out my phone and typed a message to Elise. Tell Rachel to start with the Q3 reports. That's where Claire will have buried the first transfer. Her reply came back in 40 seconds. Already did. She says she'll have something by end of week. I put the phone away, looked back out the window. When Marcus pulled up to the house, I could see the lights, on in the kitchen warm and golden through the curtained window, Vivian moving inside, dinner being prepared, the domestic architecture of a life that was ending one quiet layer at a time, while the person dismantling it smiled and set pills on a porcelain dish. I got out of the car. Marcus, I said as he closed the door behind me, Sir, keep the notebook somewhere safe, not your home. Somewhere neither of us has been in the last 6 months. He held my gaze. His eyes were steady and a little sad. Already done, Mr. Mercer. Already done. I walked up to the front door and went inside and called out that I was home, and Vivian answered from the kitchen in her warm voice, and I hung my coat up and thought every single day from now until this is finished is a performance. Make it the best one of your life. Rachel worked out of a converted loft in Carroll Gardens that smelled like printer ink and cold coffee. She had cleared her dining table entirely and replaced it with 3 monitors, 2 external hard drives, and enough printed spreadsheets to wallpaper a small apartment. When I arrived on a Friday evening, she didn't look up from the center screen. Sit down, she said. This is going to take a minute to explain, and I need you to not interrupt me until I'm done. I sat. She spun her chair to face me and picked up a stack of papers held together with a binder clip. The top sheet was dense with highlighted figures color-coded in 4 different shades. $12.4 million, she said, moved over 14 months through 3 separate shell companies. The transfers were broken into amounts small enough to avoid automatic flagging, never more than $800,000 in a single transaction. She dropped the stack on the table between us and stabbed one highlighted line with her finger. Every single authorization has Claire Holloway's digital signature on it. My stomach dropped. $12,400,000. Gone. Moved in pieces carefully like someone loading a truck in the dark. The shell companies, I said. What are they? Rachel pulled up the center monitor and turned it toward me. 3 company names on the screen, all incorporated in Delaware. All with innocuous-sounding names involving the words art, cultural, and exhibition. None of them have ever hosted an event, she said flatly. One of them has a website with stock photos of galleries in Florence. The other 2 don't even have that much. She crossed her arms. These aren't companies, Nolan. They're buckets. You pour money in, you pull it out somewhere else, and the paper trail looks like legitimate arts funding. Claire built this. Claire executed it. Rachel's jaw tightened. Someone else designed it. The structure is too clean for a CFO who's been with Mercer Holdings for 6 years. This kind of architecture takes expertise in offshore movement. Tax haven protocol. I've seen this shape before in 3 different federal cases. She looked at me steadily. Whoever set this up has done it before. I pressed 2 fingers against the bridge of my nose and breathed. The room felt very quiet and very expensive in its implications. There's a third account, Rachel said, and the way she said it, carefully watching my face, told me the worst was still coming. She turned back to the monitor and pulled up a new window. Cayman Islands. Corporate registration to a company called Ardell Consulting Group LLC. Beneficial owner listed on the formation documents. She paused. Julian Cross. The name landed like a stone dropped into still water. Julian. Celeste's son. The boy I had taught chess to on Sunday afternoons when he was 10 years old, sitting at the board in Celeste's kitchen with his tongue between his teeth, trying to think 3 moves ahead the way she'd told him to. How much? My voice came out remarkably steady, which surprised me. 600,000 so far, but the account structure suggests it's set up to receive significantly more. Rachel's expression softened just slightly, just enough to show she understood this was not an abstract number to me. I'm sorry, Nolan. I stood up, walked to the window. Carroll Gardens at dusk, brownstones and bare trees, and the particular amber glow of streetlights coming on. My chest felt like something inside it had been wrung out and hung up to dry. Keep going, I said to the window. Whatever else is in there, find it all. I will. A pause. There's something else you need to do tonight. I turned back. Dr. Keller, Rachel said. Call her, because whatever they're doing with the money they need, you cognitively compromise to make it stick legally. And if you've been taking those pills, I stopped taking them 10 days ago. Rachel's eyes closed for half a second, genuine relief quickly composed. Good, but she still needs to document what was in them. Officially. Because when this goes to court, that documentation is the difference between fraud and attempted murder. The word sat between us in the loft air. Murder. Not as a dramatic flourish. Not as an exaggeration, as a legal category, spoken by a forensic accountant who had spent weeks counting the steps of a plan that ended with me not being alive to contest it. I called Dr. Naomi Keller from the car on the way home. She picked up on the second ring, which told me Elise had already prepared her. Nolan, she said, I've been hoping you'd call. The pills, Naomi. I need you to document everything formally. I already started the report 3 days ago. A beat. I need you to come in Monday. I want a full blood panel, long-term exposure markers, cognitive baseline, everything. Whatever they put in you over the past months, I want it on record before it clears your system completely. Monday morning, I said. 7 a.m. Her voice went quieter, and the professional neutrality cracked just slightly enough for me to hear the anger underneath it. Nolan, whoever prescribed these compounds to be administered without informed consent has committed a serious crime. I want you to know that I intend to document every single element of this with complete thoroughness. Thank you, Naomi. I hung up and sat in the back of Marcus's car as we moved through the December streets, the city strung with early Christmas lights that blurred through the window glass, and I thought about Julian Cross's name on a Cayman Islands formation document. I thought about him sitting in that memorial service pew, straight-backed and dry-eyed, staring at the wall. I thought about a boy of 10 sitting across a chessboard from me, with his tongue between his teeth, trying to learn how to think ahead. He learned, I thought, and the bitterness of it settled in my chest like cold water. He learned very well. Marcus's voice came from the front. Mr. Mercer, we're coming up on the house. Do you want me to go around again? He did that sometimes, offered me another lap of the block when he could tell I needed more time before walking through a door. It was one of the kindest things a person had ever done for me, consistently without being asked. No, I said. I'm ready. I wasn't entirely, but some nights ready is just a decision you make. Ethan Cole did not look like a man who delivered bad news easily. He looked like a man who had been in situations where bad news had immediate physical consequences, and that history had given him a particular way of presenting difficult information, direct, unhurried with his body, very still, as though stillness could absorb some of the impact on behalf of the person receiving it. He met me in the monitoring room at 5:45 in the morning, before the building filled up, before anyone who reported to Damien Cross arrived for the day. The room was small and cool and smelled faintly of electronics. 3 walls of monitors, a desk, 2 chairs. Ethan had a laptop open on the desk. He turned it toward me when I sat down. I recovered 8 minutes, he said. The 42 deleted minutes are gone. Whoever wiped them used a thorough overwrite protocol. But the 8 minutes before the deletion window starts are intact. I've been through it 37 times. He pressed play. The footage was grayscale timestamp in the corner, 2:31 a.m. September 15th, 2023. The parking garage level B1 camera angle covering the service door. The image quality was poor, the kind of poor that made you work for every detail. At 2:31:14, the service door opened from the inside. A figure stepped into the frame, younger than Damien, slimmer. He held the door wide with one arm and kept his head angled slightly down, not enough to fully obscure his face, but clearly deliberate. My chest began to ache before my brain finished processing what I was seeing. "That's Julian," I said. My voice came out hoarse. "Yes." Ethan's voice was flat and careful and completely controlled. He used his own access card. The system log confirms it, his credential, his PIN. There's no ambiguity. I watched the footage loop. Julian holding the door. Julian's hand on the frame. Julian, who had been 10 years old with a chessboard and a tongue between his teeth. Julian, whose mother had disappeared through that exact door 4 minutes after this timestamp. My eyes burned. I pressed the back of my hand against my mouth hard, the way you do when something is trying to come up from your chest and you are absolutely determined not to let it. "He knew," I said. The words tasted like something metallic. "He stood there and he held the door open and he—" I stopped, breathed. He knew exactly what was happening to his mother. Ethan reached over and closed the laptop. His jaw was working slightly, the only evidence that he was not as composed as he appeared. "I'm sorry, Nolan." I sat with it for a moment. Just sat with it the way you sometimes have to sit with a terrible thing before you can move it to a place where it becomes workable. Then I straightened in my chair. "What else?" "Elise called me last night," Ethan said. "She has something you need to hear from her directly." I called Elise from the elevator on the way back up. She answered immediately. She'd been awake, I could tell from her voice. "The Julian account," she said before I could speak. "I know about the footage Ethan told me he was showing you this morning." A sharp inhale. "There's more, Dad. I've been trying to figure out how to say this." "Just say it, Elise." A pause. "Then Julian knew about the affair. Vivian and Damien. He's known for at least 2 years. Her voice cracked at the edges, not tears, but fury doing its best impression of composure. "There's a source inside the company. I'm not going to name them yet, because I need to protect them, but they overheard Julian and Damien arguing about it. Damien told Julian directly, apparently, as a way of bringing him in. Told him the plan, told him what Vivian was doing, told him what the endgame looked like. The elevator stopped on my floor. I didn't get out. I just stood there while the doors opened and closed again. Julian knew about Vivian, I said. Yes. He knew about the accounts. Yes. He knew what happened to Celeste that night." Her voice broke completely then, just for a second, just one syllable that came out raw and fractured before she pulled it back. "Yes, Dad. He knew everything, and he chose." She steadied herself, and I could hear the effort it cost her. "He chose Damien." I got out on the next floor, down from mine, and walked to the window at the end of the corridor, overlooking 57th Street. The city below was gray and cold, and moving with the indifferent energy of a Tuesday morning in December. Elise was still on the line. I could hear her breathing. "One more thing," she said quietly. "I drove past Julian's building yesterday afternoon. His car was parked out front. I was going to go up, and then I saw him through the lobby window. He was sitting in one of the chairs by the elevator, not waiting for anything, just sitting. He had his phone in his hand, and he was staring at it." She paused. Then he turned it face down on his knee and put both hands over it, like he was trying to keep something from getting out. I thought about that, about Julian sitting alone in a lobby with his hands pressed over his phone, about whatever was on that phone that he needed to hold down with both palms. "He knows what's coming," I said. "I think so." Elise's voice went very quiet. "Dad, is there any part of you that feels sorry for him?" I thought about it honestly. The way I'd tried to think honestly about everything since October. Not the answer that was easiest to live with, but the true one. "Not yet," I said. "Ask me again after this is over." She made a sound that was almost a laugh, but landed as something sadder. "I'll hold you to that." When I got back to my office, Damien was in the corridor outside, leaning against the wall with his jacket open and his hands in his pockets, easy as a man waiting for a coffee order. When he saw me, his face opened into a warm, concerned smile, the smile of a man performing relief. "There you are." He pushed off the wall and fell into step beside me. "I was just coming to find you. I had Gregory, Finalize the document's clean version ready to go. He produced an envelope from his inside pocket and held it toward me. If you could sign today, we can get ahead of the board calendar. I took the envelope. His hand landed on my shoulder, heavy and proprietary. You're doing the right thing, Nolan, he said, squeezing once. Celeste would have wanted you to protect what you both built. I looked down at the envelope in my hand. I thought about level B1 at 2:31 a.m., about a figure holding a door open in the dark. I'm sure she would have, I said, and I smiled at him the way I had learned to smile at people I intended to destroy. Julian's dinner invitation arrived by text on a Wednesday. Casual, warm, the kind of message a nephew sent an uncle he actually liked. Margot's making her short ribs. Isabel keeps asking when she'll see you again. Come Sunday, I read it twice. Thought about the envelope I'd handed Evelyn with Damien's forged documents inside. Thought about level B1 at 2:31 a.m. and typed back, wouldn't miss it. Marcus dropped me at the curb on East 74th and caught my eye in the rearview mirror before I got out. I'll be right here, he said. Just that. But the way he said it meant something larger. Margot opened the door before I knocked. Dark-haired, warm-natured, the kind of person who remembered how you took your coffee. But that evening something sat behind her eyes that hadn't been there before. A watchfulness, the tension of a woman paying very close attention to everything around her and trying not to look like she was. Nolan, she hugged me tight. It's so good to see you. You look tired, I said. She smiled a smile that didn't reach the watchful part of her eyes. Long week. Come in, Isabel's been asking about you since Thursday. The house was warm, smelled like braised meat and rosemary. Julian came forward with his hand extended, grip-firm smile calibrated to exactly the right degree of family warmth. But his eyes did the same inventory they'd done at the memorial, quick assessing check-in what I knew. Uncle Nolan, you seemed rough at the memorial. Good to see you looking better. Getting there, I said, and day by day. Dinner was sustained performance from both sides of the table. Julian talked about Q4 projections with the fluency of a man who had been studying Mercer Holdings from the inside out. He talked about Damien's vision, used the phrase moving forward 4 times in 20 minutes, and each time I heard the subtext, underneath it, moving forward without you. Margot served and redirected and kept her wineglass full and said very little. Her hand around her fork went white at the knuckles more than once. Then Isabel came to the table. 9 years old, with Celeste's eyes, that particular clear, direct gray that didn't look away when it looked at you. She climbed into her chair, announced she wasn't hungry because she'd had a big snack, and immediately wanted to show me her drawings. Isabel, dinner first. Julian started. It's all right, I said. I'd love to see them. She disappeared and came back with a stack of papers. Horses, rainbows, an oval dog, an ambitious attempt at the New York skyline. I went through them with her asking questions while she leaned against my arm and narrated each one with the complete confidence of an artist explaining her own retrospective. Then I turned to the next drawing and my breath stopped. A door, painted in heavy red crayon, pressed hard into the page, the specific color a child used when they meant it. The door was set into a wall that went dark at the edges. Below it, stairs going down drawn in brown and gray. On the stairs, 2 figures. A large one and a small one. The large figure had its hand on the small one's arm. My heart slammed against my ribs. Who drew this one, sweetheart? I kept my voice completely even. Isabel leaned over. Me. That's the red door. Tell me about the red door. It's where Grandpa Damien took Grandma Celeste. She said it the way children said things adults had failed to understand, with mild impatience at having to explain the obvious. We went there once. Grandpa said it was a building they might buy. I stayed in the car, but I could see through the window. The lady looked really tired, like she didn't want to walk anymore. The room dropped 10 degrees. Across the table, Julian had gone the color of old plaster. He picked up his wineglass and set it down without drinking. Isabel, his voice stretched thin over something sharp underneath. Go get your other drawings, the ones from school. But I want to show... Now, please, not a request. Isabel looked at him, that direct gray gaze, then looked at me, then slid off her chair and patted out with her papers. Julian recovered his smoothness like a surface healing over a crack. Kids that age, she has an extraordinary imagination. We've been working with her teacher on separating dream memory from real memory, apparently very common at this developmental stage. Of course, I said. She's very creative. Margot was staring at the tablecloth. Her jaw was tight, lips pressed together with the careful concentration of a woman who had things to say and had decided this was not the moment. I stayed another 40 minutes, complimented the short ribs, helped Julian clear the table, hugged Isabel goodbye, and she tucked a drawing into my coat pocket, the oval dog, and told me his name was Biscuit. In the car, when the townhouse was out of sight, I reached into my pocket, past the oval dog drawing. I unfolded the image in my lap. A red door, underground, stairs going down. Marcus, I said. Sir. 15 years ago, the North Pier acquisition the Opera House Damien managed due diligence on. Do you remember it? Marcus's hands adjusted slightly on the wheel. I remember driving him there 4 or 5 times. He had a set of keys. The deal fell through, but he kept them for months. My chest tightened. Do you remember what the building looked like? A pause. Then quietly, old brick, Art Deco front, red-painted steel door on the east side. I looked down at Isabel's drawing in my lap. The crayon lines, the heavy red door. Oh, Celeste. When I got home, I went straight to my study and locked the door. My phone was already in my hand. Then it buzzed before I could dial an unknown number. The message a single line. She's still alive. Check your mailbox tomorrow morning. A friend. Before I tell you what Margot slid across that table, the message that changed everything I thought I knew. I need to know you're still with me. Drop a still here in the comments right to now. Just those 2 words. Because what's coming next, I promise you weren't expecting it. And one thing before we go further, parts of this story contain fictional elements woven in to bring the truth to life. If that's not something you're comfortable with, this is a good place to step away. No judgment. But if you're staying, hold on tight. I was at the mailbox at 5:58 in the morning. The street was dark and cold, perfectly quiet except for a garbage truck working the next block, its hydraulics groaning in the frozen air. My breath came out in visible puffs. I hadn't slept. I had lain in the dark beside Vivian for 6 hours, running the same calculations over and over, testing the same conclusion from every angle, and every angle kept returning the same answer. The envelope was there. Small plain, no return address. Inside a key, old brass, the number B2 scratched into the bow, and a folded card with 2 words in handwriting I didn't recognize, North Pier. I stood on my front step in the pre-dawn dark, holding a key to a basement I'd never been in, and felt something in my chest I could only describe as the specific, devastating relief of a man who had been telling himself something impossible for 13 months and had just been handed permission to believe it. 2 days later, Margot called. She asked for coffee, somewhere quiet, somewhere she hadn't been before. I chose a place on West 46th, small cash only, no reason to appear in anyone's calendar. Margot was already there when I arrived. Corner table, back to the wall, hat pulled down, a cup of tea, gone cold in front of her. Her eyes were red-rimmed and raw, not from recent crying, but from days of it, the accumulated evidence of a woman who had been quietly falling apart in private. Are you safe? I asked, before anything else. Her chin trembled once before she pulled it back. For now, Julian thinks I'm shopping. He tracks my location. I left my phone at Bergdorf's with my friend Dana. The lengths she had gone to just to sit across the table from me hit me somewhere behind the sternum. Tell me, I said. She wrapped both hands around the cold teacup. After dinner, after Isabel's drawing, she stopped, pressed her lips together hard. I want you to know she's drawn that door a dozen times. I told myself it was imagination. Julian convinced me it was a dream she'd mixed up with something real. I let him convince me because the alternative was something I couldn't survive thinking about. A tear slipped down her cheek, and she wiped it away almost angrily. Isabel doesn't make things up, Nolan. She never has. She says what she saw. I know. So I waited until Julian was in the shower 2 nights ago. I took his phone off the nightstand and went through his messages. Her hands tightened around the cup until her knuckles went pale. I found the thread with Damien. She reached into her coat and set a folded paper on the table. A screenshot printed at home, edges slightly uneven. A text thread, Damien's number at the top. Damien, if Nolan signs before end of month, we won't need to keep her anymore, Julian. What does won't need to keep her mean? Damien, don't ask questions you don't want the answer to. Julian, Dad, Damien, focus on the board meeting. That's your job. I read it once. Then I set the paper flat on the table with both hands pressed on top of it, and I breathed one breath, 2, 3, because if I didn't, I was going to say something that would frighten the woman sitting across from me who had risked everything to be here. Keep her. Present tense, not kept, not past. She's alive, I said. My voice came out rough and cracked at the edges in a way I didn't try to hide. Margot, she's alive. Margot's face collapsed completely finally, all the controlled composure dissolving at once. She pressed both hands over her mouth, and her shoulders shook, and tears ran down both cheeks. A sob broke through, muffled and desperate, the sound of a woman who had been holding something terrible, alone for days, and was only now setting it down. I didn't know, she choked out. The accounts, the company, Celeste. I didn't know what Julian was involved in until I saw that thread. She's someone's mother. She's your sister. And my husband knew where she was, and he never... Her voice dissolved. I reached across the table and covered her hands with mine. Margot, look at me. She looked up, eyes streaming, face crumpled with shame that wasn't hers to carry. You came here, I said. That's what matters. She nodded, pulling in long, shaking breaths. Then she reached back into her coat and produced a small manila envelope. A key. I found it in Julian's desk 2 months ago and didn't know what it meant. And there's a photo. I opened the envelope. A grainy printed photograph. 2 men in front of a brick building. Damien on the left. Another man, shorter, dark-jacketed. Behind them, the Art Deco facade of a building I had now seen in a child's crayon drawing and a 15-year-old acquisition file. On the back, in Julian's handwriting, D. Pike, North Pier, August 23rd. Adrian Pike, Damien's fixer. I put everything carefully back in the envelope. My hands were steady. I was grateful for that. Margot, I said, go back to Dana's. Pick up your phone. Go home and act like this morning didn't happen. Can you do that? She straightened in her chair, visibly deliberately, like a person deciding to be braver than they felt. Yes, I'm going to get her back. My voice came out with a certainty I hadn't planned but completely meant. And when this is over, you and Isabel will be protected. I promise. Her chin wobbled dangerously. She nodded and picked up her coat. At the door, she turned back. Nolan, her voice barely above a whisper, Isabel keeps drawing that door, over and over. Red door stairs going down. I think she's been trying to tell someone for months, and nobody listened. The door closed behind her. I sat with my hands flat on the table and thought about a 9-year-old girl pressing red crayon into paper as hard as she could over and over, trying to make someone see. I see it now, sweetheart, I thought. I see it. Back in the car, I called Ethan. North Pier Opera House. Blueprints, basement levels, utility records, building inspection files from the last 3 years. A pause. And sweep my office again tonight, before anyone else is in. On it, Ethan said, then quieter. Nolan, is she alive? My throat tightened so sharply it almost closed. Yes, I said. I think she is. On the other end of the line, I heard Ethan exhale long, shaking the breath of a man who had been holding something in for a very long time. Then let's go get her, he said. Ethan arrived at my office at 5:40 a.m. with a black equipment case the size of a carry-on bag and the expression of a man who had not slept and didn't intend to mention it. I had the coffee ready. He didn't touch it. He opened the case on my desk, a handheld RF signal detector, a non-linear junction detector, a small device I didn't recognize that he referred to simply as the sweeper. He worked methodically, starting at the door and moving inward, covering the walls in slow horizontal passes. Crouching to run the sweeper along the baseboard, checking behind picture frames under the desk inside the lamp base. I stood by the window and watched the city come pale and gray out of the December dark and said nothing. 11 minutes in, Ethan stopped. He was at my desk standing over the pencil cup, the one Elise had given me 3 birthdays ago, dark ceramic, stamped with the Mercer Holdings logo. He set the RF detector down and picked up a brushed steel pen that I had never seen before and would not have been able to say with certainty wasn't always there. He turned it over once. Then he looked at me with his jaw set hard and his eyes doing something controlled and furious. There it is, he said quietly. He set the pen on the desk between us. We both looked at it. A perfectly ordinary object that had been listening to every conversation in this room for how long? Weeks, certainly. Since Vivian had reorganized my desk in November. Every call with Elise, every meeting with Evelyn, every time I had sat in this chair and thought out loud. My stomach turned over with slow, cold revulsion. How much range? I asked. 200 meters minimum, maybe more depending on the relay. Ethan crossed his arms. Someone within that radius has been receiving a live feed every time this room was occupied. I picked up the pen, turned it in my fingers. It was good work, the kind of device that cost real money, the kind you didn't buy off a shelf. Adrian Pike's domain, almost certainly. Don't destroy it, I said. Ethan's eyebrows moved fractionally. You want to keep it active. I want to use it, I said. If they've been listening to everything I say in this room, then everything I say in this room from today forward is information I'm choosing to give them. I paused. Damien has other sources, Vivian Claire's system alerts. But he's a man who acts on intelligence before he verifies it. Give him something through this channel, and he'll move on it. That's what I'm counting on. Ethan looked at the pen, then at me. Then something shifted in his face. Not quite a smile, but the expression of a man recognizing a move he respected. When? He asked. Soon. I straightened up. First, I need Evelyn to have the counter documents ready. Then I need Rachel to finish tracing the Nassau routing. When all the pieces are in place, then I'll give Damien something to send his people after. That afternoon, I met with Evelyn at her office. She had the full counterstructure prepared, 41 pages, tabbed and indexed, with the thoroughness of a woman who understood that the difference between winning and losing in a courtroom was often the difference between a document that was airtight and one that merely appeared to be. The guardianship petition is dead the moment you file this beneficial ownership declaration, she said, tapping the first section. Everything transfers to the protected trust. Gregory Shaw can waive his competency evaluation at the court. All he likes, there will be nothing left to attach it to. How long to execute? I can have it filed by end of week. She looked at me over her reading glasses. But Nolan, once we file, they'll know we know. The window for appearing uninformed closes permanently. I know. I leaned forward. That's why I'm not filing it yet. I need you to hold it, ready to execute on my signal. Evelyn set her pen down and studied me the way lawyers studied things they weren't sure they approved of, but recognized as strategically sound. You're going to let them believe they've won. For a little while longer, yes. And in the meantime, I'm going to sign their document, I said. The version you prepared. The one that looks exactly like what they want, but contains a clause on page 4 buried in the definitions section that voids the entire instrument if the co-founder's consent was obtained under duress or material misrepresentation. I looked at her. Which it was, which we can prove, which means the moment they try to use it, it collapses under its own weight. Evelyn's mouth curved just slightly, just at the corner, the expression of a woman who had spent 30 years in law and still found a well-constructed trap genuinely satisfying. I'll have it ready tomorrow. The following Tuesday, Damien came to my office. I had arranged the room carefully. The pen was in the pencil cup. The document Evelyn had prepared was on my desk, positioned, as though I'd been reviewing it. When Damien walked in, I was standing at the window with a coffee mug, wearing the specific look of a man who had given up on something and was trying to make peace with it. Nolan, he came in warm, concerned hand extended. I'm glad you called. Sit down, Damien. I turned from the window and gestured to the chair across from my desk. I sat across from him and pushed the document forward. I've looked at everything, talked to a few people. I rubbed the back of my neck. You're right. The company needs stability. I haven't been well, and I think I've been making this harder than it needs to be. Damien's face opened with relief, so genuine, it was almost painful to watch the relief of a man who had been working towards something for years, and was finally seeing it arrive. You're doing the right thing, Nolan. I promise you. Don't, I said gently but firmly enough that he stopped. Don't promise me anything. Just let me sign it, and let's move forward. I picked up my pen, not the steel one, my own, and signed on the indicated line. Damien watched every stroke with the focused attention of a man watching a check clear. I slid the document across. He picked it up, scanned it quickly, and his smile settled into something permanent and satisfied. Thank you, he said. Truly. Take care of it, I said. After he left, I sat at my desk and picked up the steel pen from the pencil cup. I spoke directly into it clearly and conversationally, the way a man talks when he believes no one is listening. Ethan, I think the Midtown storage facility on West 39th is worth checking. The one Celeste used before the move. Marcus mentioned she kept documents there. I'm thinking Thursday night. I set the pen back. There was no Midtown storage facility. There were no documents. There was no Thursday plan. But within 48 hours, I knew with complete certainty there would be two of Damien's men standing in front of a locked storage unit on West 39th Street, wondering what they were doing there. And I would be somewhere else entirely. The black SUV was still there at 6:47 in the morning. I had been parked on Rachel's block in Carroll Gardens since 6:15. Engine off, heat fading, watching the vehicle in my side mirror. No plates on the front. Rental sticker residue on the rear bumper recently removed. The windows were tinted past the legal limit for New York State, which told me whoever was inside either didn't care about that or had calculated that no traffic cop was going to pull over a vehicle connected to Damien Cross's operation. My phone buzzed. Rachel, he's still out there. I've been watching from my window for an hour. I haven't slept. I typed back, I'm on your street. Don't come out yet. At 6:53, the driver's door opened. Adrian Pike stepped out. I had seen photographs of him from Marcus's surveillance log, mid-40s, compact with the kind of unremarkable face that was designed by nature for exactly this kind of work. He moved with the economy of a man who wasted nothing, not gestures, not steps, not expressions. He walked to the front door of Rachel's building and stood there for 30 seconds looking at the intercom panel. Then he took out a phone and typed something. Rachel's phone lit up in my hand. I was still in the call thread. Oh, God. He just texted me. I read it over her shoulder through the shared screen, Ms. Lynn. I know what you've been doing for the past 6 weeks. Stop now, and nothing happens to you. Keep going, and your sister in Portland becomes the subject of a federal fraud investigation. We have people in every office. Think carefully. My jaw tightened so hard it ached. Portland. Her sister. They had done their homework on Rachel Lynn, who she loved, where that person lived, how to reach her through the thing that mattered most. My phone rang in my ear. Rachel. Nolan. Her voice was controlled, but I could hear the tremor underneath it, the sound of someone who was furious and frightened simultaneously and refusing to let the frightened part win. He mentioned my sister. I heard. I kept my voice steady. Rachel, look at me. Not literally, just hear me. They're doing this because you found something they can't afford to have found. The threat is real, but it's also evidence. Screenshot that message right now. The sound of her phone camera clicking. Good. Now listen to me carefully. I watched Pike walk back to the SUV and get in. You are not going to stop. But you're also not going to be unprotected. I'm calling Detective Hugo Bennett in the next 10 minutes, and I'm going to arrange for your sister to have someone watching her building within 24 hours. Quietly. She won't even know. A long pause. I could hear Rachel's breathing measured, deliberate, a woman talking herself down from the edge of genuine fear. Can you keep working? I asked. Another pause, longer, then with a resolve that came from somewhere deep and decided, yes, but Nolan, they knew I was looking at the accounts, which means someone inside Mercer Holdings told them I exist. My chest went cold. She was right. I had been careful about Rachel. No company email, no visitor log, no mention of her name in any meeting inside Mercer Holdings. There were only 4 people who knew about her, Elise, Evelyn, Ethan, and Marcus. None of them had told Damien, which meant the leak was somewhere else. I ran backward through every conversation, every moment of exposure. Rachel had been accessing financial records through a secure portal that Elise had set up. The portal itself was clean, but Rachel had pulled documents that Claire Holloway had originally filed. And Claire Holloway as CFO would have received an automated system alert the moment someone outside normal access parameters had pulled those specific documents. Claire didn't tell Damien about Rachel. Claire's automated system told Damien about Rachel. It wasn't a person, I said. It was a system alert. Claire's CFO access triggers notifications when unusual document requests come through. I exhaled slowly. She may not even know she flagged you. Or she may have flagged me on purpose and is watching what happens next, Rachel said flatly. She had recovered her composure fully now. Her voice was back to its professional, precise register, the voice she used when she was reading spreadsheets. Either way, I need to change how I'm accessing the remaining accounts. Give me 12 hours. Take what you need. And Nolan, her voice shifted the faintest edge of something personal, breaking through the professional surface. "Thank you for being on my street this morning. I didn't know you were there, but—" She stopped. "It matters. Get back to work," I said, but not unkindly. I called Hugo Carver from the car. He picked up on the first ring, which was becoming a pattern that told me he had been expecting my calls to escalate. I need a quiet watch on a woman in Portland, Oregon," I said. "Non-law enforcement visible, private arrangement, and I need the person doing it reporting directly to me." Timeline. Today. Hugo's exhale was audible. "This is getting bigger than I thought it was." "Yes," I said. "It is." "How much bigger?" I looked out the windshield at Adrian Pike's SUV, still parked, engine running, exhaust visible in the cold morning air. "Kidnapping," I said. "Attempted murder. Financial fraud across 4 jurisdictions. And a woman who has been held underground for 15 months while her husband ran her memorial service." The silence on Hugo's end lasted exactly 4 seconds. When he spoke again, his voice had changed flatter. More precise, the voice he used when he stopped being a contact and became an investigator. "I'm going to need everything you have," he said. "Not now, I know you're not ready. But when you move Nolan, I need to be ready to move at the same time." "You will be," I said. "I promise you that." That night I sat in Marcus's car outside my own house for 20 minutes before going in. The lights were on upstairs, Vivian's bedroom window warm and yellow. I thought about Rachel sitting by her window, watching a black SUV for an hour without sleeping. I thought about Margot pressing her hands over her mouth in a coffee shop on West 46th. I thought about all the people who had been frightened and quiet and absorbing damage while Damien and Vivian moved money and filed papers and positioned themselves for a clean legal takeover of everything my sister and I had built together. "Marcus," I said. "Sir? How are you holding up?" He was quiet for a moment, the thoughtful quiet of a man actually answering the question rather than deflecting it. "I'm holding up fine, Mr. Mercer." A pause. "Better than fine, actually. I've been waiting a long time to be useful in something that mattered." Something in my chest shifted warm and unexpected, and a little painful the way genuine gratitude sometimes was. "You've been useful from the beginning," I said. He nodded once, accepting that without embarrassment, and got out to open my door. I went inside. Vivian called a greeting from upstairs. I answered. And then my phone buzzed with a message from Margot that made my blood go cold. "Julian left the house an hour ago. Black bag he never lets me touch." Laptop. "Nolan, I think they're moving her." We left at 1 in the morning. Marcus had swapped his town car for a 10-year-old Chevrolet Impala registered to a cousin in Queens. No GPS, no rental record, no connection to any name that Damien Cross had ever heard. Ethan rode in the back with a flashlight, a blueprint he'd pulled from the city's archived building inspection database, and a bolt cutter wrapped in a canvas tarp. I sat in the passenger seat and watched the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway unspool in the dark, and thought about Margot's message from 3 nights ago. "I think they're moving her." We didn't know if they had. We didn't know if we were already too late. That possibility sat in the car with us the entire drive, and none of us named it out loud because naming it wouldn't help anything. North Pier at 1 a.m. was the kind of quiet that felt intentional. The industrial waterfront dark, the warehouses shuttered. The only sound, the low, rhythmic slap of the East River against the pylons, and the distant groan of a container ship moving upriver. The Opera House sat at the end of a cracked access road behind a chain-link fence with a padlocked gate. Art Deco facade brick gone dark with age, the ornamental ironwork above the entrance bent and rusted. And on the east side, barely visible behind a panel of corrugated tin sheeting that had been propped against the wall like it had simply fallen there, a red-painted steel door. Isabel had pressed that color into the paper so hard the crayon had nearly torn through. Marcus cut the padlock on the access gate. We moved through single file, no talking, and I kept my flashlight aimed low. The east door had a commercial deadbolt that Ethan bypassed in under 2 minutes, with a tension wrench and a pick that he produced from his jacket, with the casual competence of a man who had learned skills in places he didn't discuss at dinner. Inside, cold air and the smell of decades' mildew and old upholstery and the particular dusty sweetness of a building that had been sealed too long. We were in a service corridor, bare concrete pipes running along the ceiling, a single bare bulb fixture that hadn't had a working bulb since the Clinton administration. The staircase down to B1 was at the end of the corridor. The B1 level was large, the full footprint of the building ceiling, low, what had once been storage for sets and rigging equipment. Old velvet theater seats were stacked in uneven towers along the far wall. A broken lighting board lay on its side near the center. Dust everywhere, thick and undisturbed. Except, "Someone's been here," Ethan said, crouching near the base of the staircase. He ran his light along the floor, a line in the dust, narrow-wheeled, recent. 2 weeks ago, maybe less. My chest contracted sharply. 2 weeks ago, after Margot's message, after Julian left with the black bag. We spent 20 minutes covering every inch of B1. Every wall, every corner, every place a door might be hidden or a floor panel might lift. Nothing. I stood in the center of the room with my flashlight off, breathing carefully, and felt the particular nauseating drop of a man who had staked everything on a location and found it empty. "They knew we were coming," Ethan said from across the room. His voice was flat with controlled anger. "The device in your office, even after you planted the Midtown story, they may have had a secondary confirmation from somewhere. Or they moved her before we got here," Marcus said. His voice was quiet and careful, the way he got when he was managing something difficult. "Nolan, if they moved her in the last 2 weeks, she's still somewhere. They wouldn't—" He stopped, chose his next words with visible precision. "The message said we won't need to keep her anymore, only if you sign. You haven't signed the real documents. She's still leverage." He was right. I held on to that. "The blueprint," I said. "Ethan, show me again." Ethan spread the building inspection document on top of a dust-covered equipment case and shone his light on it. The B1 level was clearly marked, and below it in the original 1931 construction plan that predated the building's conversion to a theater, a second basement level. B2, cold storage, the original annotation read, access via east service shaft. "There's no staircase marked from B1 to B2, I said. "No," Ethan agreed, "which means the entrance was sealed or hidden when the building was converted." He traced the blueprint with one finger. The east service shaft would have come from outside the main structure, a separate entry point. Marcus was already moving back toward the corridor. He stopped at a section of the east wall concrete block painted gray. Nothing remarkable about it at all, except that when Marcus pressed his knuckle against it in 3 places, and knocked the third knock, returned a sound that was different from the first 2. Not hollow exactly, but not as solid. "Mr. Mercer," Marcus said, and his voice had changed lower, more careful, like a man handling something fragile. "This section of wall, it was patched, recently. You can see where the paint sheen is different, newer compound over older block." I crossed the room and put my hand flat against the wall. The paint was slightly less matte in a section roughly 3 feet wide. "Behind this," I said. "Behind this," Marcus confirmed. Ethan was already examining the edges. "There's a seam on the left side. It's a panel, not solid block. Someone bricked the original shaft entrance and put a false front over it." He looked up at me. "This is the way down." My phone buzzed. Ethan's phone buzzed simultaneously. We both looked. A text from the burner number Ethan had set up to monitor Damien's car, GPSD. Cross vehicle West 39th and 10th. Stationary. 2 additional vehicles. The Midtown bait. It had worked. "We have maybe 40 minutes before someone reports back that there's nothing at that storage facility," Ethan said, already reaching for the bolt cutter. "Then we move now," I said. Ethan put the bolt cutter against the seam and leaned into it with everything he had. The panel cracked open. Cold air came up from below, different from the B1 cold, deeper, stiller. The cold of a place that had been sealed for a very long time with something living inside it. The shaft went down 12 feet by a steel ladder bolted into the concrete wall. Ethan went first, then me. Marcus came last and pulled the panel closed behind him. Not locked, just rested back into its frame, because if anyone came down to B1 before we were done, we needed those extra seconds. The bottom of the shaft opened into a corridor, narrower than the one above. Ceiling lower. The smell different again, not just cold now, but human. The particular close air of a space where someone had been breathing for a very long time. My flashlight swept the corridor. Concrete floor, bare walls, a single cable running along the ceiling toward the far end, where it terminated at a junction box. And at the end of the corridor, perhaps 30 feet away, a door. Red-painted steel. the paint gone to rust at the edges, a heavy bolt across the outside secured with a padlock. My legs moved before I told them to. The padlock matched the key Margot had sent me. My hands were shaking not from cold, from something that had been building in my chest for 13 months and was now pressing so hard against my ribs that I could barely draw a full breath. The key went in on the second try because my fingers weren't cooperating, and I made a sound that I was not entirely in control of when the lock released. I pulled the bolt back. I pushed the door open. The room was perhaps 15 feet square. A cot against the far wall, a bucket, a single battery-powered camp lantern on the floor, its light dim and yellowish. A stack of papers near the cot, dozens of sheets covered in handwriting, organized into neat piles with the methodical care of someone who had needed a project to stay sane. And on the cot, sitting upright, one wrist attached to a U-bolt in the wall by a light cable restraint, thin, older than she had been, her dark hair long and unwashed, and streaked with gray that hadn't been there before, was my sister, Celeste. Rowan looked at me. Her face went through 5 things in the space of 2 seconds. Shock, disbelief, a crumpling that was pure grief. Then something that blazed up through all of it like a light being switched on. "Nolan!" Her voice came out barely above a whisper, wrecked and hoarse, but completely hers. My throat closed so completely that no sound came out at all. I crossed the room in 4 steps, dropped to my knees in front of the cot, and took both her hands in mine. Her fingers were cold and thin, and they gripped me back with a strength that astonished me. "I knew you'd come," she said, and her voice broke apart on the last word, and she pressed her forehead against mine, and we stayed like that while Ethan worked the cable restraint off her wrist. "I just didn't know if I'd still be here when you did." "I'm here," I managed. My voice was barely functional. "I'm here, Celeste." She pulled back and looked at my face, searching it the way she used to look at legal documents, checking for everything, missing nothing. Her eyes were wet, but her gaze was sharp and present and completely undimmed by 14 months in this room. "Vivian was the one who locked the door that night," she said. Her voice steadied as she said it, like the act of saying it out loud had been waiting inside her for a very long time. "Damien planned it. He organized it. But when they brought me down here, it was Vivian who turned the key. She looked at me through the gap before she closed it." Celeste's jaw tightened. She didn't say anything. She just looked and closed it. My chest caved in around something I didn't have words for. "I know," I said. "There's something else." Celeste gripped my hands harder. "Damien talked freely in front of me after the first few months. I think he forgot I was still a person who could hear things." Her chin lifted. "He told Adrian approximately 3 months ago that once Mercer Holdings transferred and you had signed the final documents, you were not going to survive the spring." The words landed in the room like stones dropped into still water. "He said that," I said. "He said Nolan won't be a problem past April. And Adrian said same method as the other, and Damien said cleaner." Her eyes held mine without flinching. "I don't know what the other refers to, but I wrote it down." She reached under the edge of the cot mattress and produced a folded piece of paper, thin, carefully preserved. "I wrote down everything I heard. Dates, times, exact words. Every Tuesday and Friday when Adrian came." Then she reached down and pulled off her right shoe. From the hollowed-out insole she removed a second piece of paper, smaller folded, tighter, worn soft with handling. She pressed it into my hand. "Account number," she said. "The one Adrian uses to pay the man who brings food. I heard him read it out on the phone. I repeated it to myself every night for 6 weeks, until I had it perfectly. It routes through Nassau." Her eyes went fierce. "Give that to whoever is following the money. It's the master account. Everything connects back to it." I stared at her. 14 months underground. And she had spent that time listening, memorizing, preserving. "Celeste." My voice gave out completely. I pressed the back of her hand against my mouth and held it there and breathed through the burning behind my eyes. "Don't you dare cry yet," she said, and her voice cracked even as she said it. "Not until we're outside. Then you can cry as much as you want." I looked up at her and laughed, a broken, involuntary sound that surprised both of us. "There's something in my office safe," she said, quieter now. "The small one behind the Hopper print. Don't open it until this is completely finished. Promise me." "I promise." "Good." She squeezed my hands once hard. Then she looked past me at Ethan and Marcus standing in the doorway and straightened her spine in a way that made something ache behind my ribs. "Now." Are we leaving, or are we waiting for an invitation? Marcus made a sound that was half laugh and half something else entirely, and stepped forward to help her stand. From outside the corridor, a faint sound reached us footsteps on the B1 level above. The footsteps above us were not trying to be quiet. 2 sets, maybe 3, moving across the B1 floor with the heavy, purposeful tread of men who had been sent somewhere and were doing their job. We heard them through the concrete ceiling, dull, rhythmic, getting closer to the area above the panel. Ethan was already at the corridor wall, one hand raised flat. He mouthed, "Move, now." Marcus had Celeste's arm across his shoulders before I'd finished standing up. She tried to take her own weight, and her legs buckled 14 months of limited movement muscles that had gone soft from disuse, and she made a sharp pain sound through her teeth that she immediately converted into something harder. "I'm fine," she said through a jaw so tight it barely moved. "Don't slow down for me." "We're not slowing down," Marcus said, and he took more of her weight without discussion, and they moved. The ladder was the problem. 12 feet of vertical steel rungs with a woman who hadn't climbed anything in over a year. Ethan went up first fast and braced himself at the top. Marcus went up 2 rungs and guided Celeste's hands to the rails while I came behind her close ready to catch if her arms gave. She climbed. Slowly, with visible effort, her breath coming in short, controlled bursts, her arms shaking on every rung. But she climbed. She didn't ask for help beyond what was already being given, and she didn't make another sound. When Ethan pulled her through the opening at the top, she collapsed against the wall of the B1 corridor for exactly 4 seconds. Head back, eyes closed, chest heaving, and then she pushed herself upright and said, "Which way?" Above us, the footsteps had stopped. Then a voice muffled through the floor. "Check the east side again." We moved. The service corridor, the east door, the cracked access road. Ethan went first with the flashlight off, navigating by memory and ambient light, and we came out into the cold January air of North Pier at 1:47 a.m. Marcus's Impala was where we'd left it, and he had Celeste in the back seat, with an emergency blanket from the trunk wrapped around her shoulders before I'd finished pulling the east door closed behind us. I got in beside her. The car started. We moved. Nobody spoke for 3 full minutes. The time it took to get off the pier access road and onto the surface streets, past the warehouses, past the chain link in the dark water. When the lights of the BQE appeared ahead, I exhaled something that had been sitting in my lungs since January 15th, 2023. In the back seat, Celeste's head came to rest against my shoulder. Her breathing was still ragged at the edges, her body working to regulate temperature and shock, and the simple, overwhelming fact of open space after 14 months without it. I put my arm around her and felt how thin she was, the bones of her shoulder close beneath her skin in a way they hadn't been before. My eyes burned. I blinked hard and looked at the road ahead. "Nolan," she said quietly. "Yeah." "Is Elise all right?" My throat tightened so fast it hurt. Out of everything, out of the months of fear in the room and the chain and the cold, that was her first complete sentence in the car. "Is Elise all right?" "She's been running circles around all of us," I said, and my voice came out rougher than I intended. "She's extraordinary. She found everything." Celeste made a sound that was almost a laugh, and almost a sob, and landed somewhere between the two. "Of course she did." She pulled the blanket tighter. "She gets that from you, you know, not from me." "That's not true." "It's completely true. I would have confronted Damien directly in month 2 and gotten myself killed." A pause. "You were always the patient one." "I wasn't patient. I was terrified." She looked up at me, then really looked, the way she used to look at me when we were children, and she was trying to determine whether I was telling the truth. Her eyes were wet, and her face was gaunt, and she was the most welcome sight I had seen in over a year. "You found me," she said simply. The safe house in Queens was a 2-bedroom on a residential street in Astoria that Evelyn had leased through a shell entity 3 weeks ago. Dr. Naomi Keller was waiting outside when we arrived. Coat on bag in hand, she'd been there 20 minutes already. She took one look at Celeste getting out of the car, and her professional composure cracked visibly. Her hand came up to cover her mouth for a moment before she pulled it back down. "Mrs. Rowan," she said, stepping forward. "I'm Dr. Keller. Let's get you inside." "Doctor?" Celeste took her offered arm. "Please tell me you have hot coffee." I have hot coffee, a full medical kit, and instructions from Nolan to not let you do anything until I've examined you. He always was bossy, Celeste said, and Dr. Keller laughed, a startled, relieved sound, and guided her through the door. I sat on the front step after they went in. The January air was very cold and very still. Marcus settled on the step beside me without being asked, his big hands hanging between his knees, looking at the quiet street. "She's going to be all right," he said. "Yes," my voice came out barely above a whisper. "She is." We sat there for a few minutes, the two of us, while the city made its low ambient sounds around us, and inside the house through the closed door I could hear the murmur of Dr. Keller's voice and Celeste answering, and it was the best sound I had heard in 14 months. Then my phone lit up. Damien. I looked at the screen, his name pulsing in the dark. I answered on the fourth ring voice, easy, slightly thick, with what could be read as "asleep." "Damien, it's almost 2 in the morning." His voice came through carefully controlled. Too carefully. "I know, I'm sorry to call so late. I just wanted to check in. How are you feeling?" "Tired," I said honestly, "but better than I've been in a while." A pause, measuring. "Good," he said. "Good. We should talk this week." "Absolutely," I said. "Let's find a time." I hung up and looked at Marcus. He was watching me. "He knows something happened," I said. "He just doesn't know what." Marcus nodded slowly. "How long before he figures it out?" I looked back at the front door of the safe house. "Long enough," I said. "We just need it to be long enough." The emergency board meeting was called for a Tuesday at 10 a.m. Elise filed the notice at 9 p.m. the previous Thursday through channels that bypassed Damien's office entirely direct to the independent board members, each one contacted individually by Evelyn Ross, with a personal call and a sealed document packet delivered by courier. By Friday morning, 7 of the 9 independent board members had confirmed attendance. Damien called me at 11 a.m. Friday. His voice had an edge underneath the warmth, thin sharp like a knife wrapped in cloth. "An emergency session," he said. "Nolan, if there's something you want to discuss, we should do it directly." "Of course we should," I said pleasantly, "and we will. Tuesday at 10. I'll see you then." I hung up before he could respond. The morning of the meeting, I arrived 40 minutes early. Evelyn was already in the conference room with Rachel setting up the presentation. Rachel had color-coded everything 3 monitors on the credenza documents organized in labeled folders. The account trail laid out in a sequence so clear that a person with no financial background could follow it from first transfer to final destination without getting lost. I stood at the window and watched Manhattan come alive in the February cold and thought about the last time I had stood in this room feeling like I owned it. Damien arrived at 9:58 with Julian at his shoulder and Gregory Shaw 1 step behind. Damien's suit was impeccable, his expression calibrated to concerned confusion, a man who didn't know what this was about and was worried for the company. Julian walked in without looking at anyone, jaw tight, eyes fixed on the middle distance with the concentrated blankness of a man trying not to think about what was coming. Gregory Shaw saw Evelyn, and his face went very still. The board members took their seats. Elise stood at the head of the table, and when the room settled, she spoke without preamble. "Thank you all for coming on short notice. What I'm about to present constitutes evidence of systematic financial fraud, illegal asset transfer, and criminal conspiracy targeting Mercer Holdings and its co-founder, Nolan Mercer. Rachel Lynn, our forensic accountant, will walk us through the financial evidence first." Damien's hand tightened on the table. "This is completely inappropriate. Rachel Lynn was never authorized." "She was authorized by me," I said from my seat. My voice was even and clear, and I held his gaze without blinking. "As co-founder and 50% beneficial owner of Mercer Holdings, my authorization is sufficient. Please continue, Rachel." Rachel clicked to the first slide. Her voice was precise and unhurried, the voice of a woman who had spent 6 weeks preparing for exactly this moment and was not going to be rushed through it. $12.4 million moved across 14 months through 3 Delaware-registered shell companies, every transfer authorized by Claire Holloway, acting CFO, under instruction from Damien Cross. The terminal account is a Cayman Islands vehicle Ardale Consulting Group LLC beneficial owner. She clicked to the next slide. Julian's name in large, clean font. Julian made a sound like someone had hit him in the chest. He pushed back slightly from the table, and his face went gray. Ethan stepped forward and dimmed the room lights. The presentation screen filled with the garage camera footage, grainy, time-stamped, unmistakable. Julian's figure at the service door at 2:31 a.m. A board member to my left made a sharp, involuntary intake of breath. Gregory Shaw stood up so fast his chair scraped back. I have here a power of attorney, signed by Nolan Mercer, granting Damien Cross interim operational. That document has a fatal procedural defect. Evelyn's voice cut through his like a blade through paper. She set a counter document on the table, tabbed, flagged, ready. Section 4, paragraph 2. The notarization was conducted by a New Jersey notary for a New York instrument without the required apostille certification. It is legally unenforceable. It has been unenforceable since the moment it was signed. She looked at Gregory with an expression of serene professional contempt. Would you like me to cite the statute? Gregory sat back down. The door to the conference room opened. Claire Holloway walked in. She looked terrible. Pale eyes swollen from what had clearly been days of very little sleep, wearing a coat she hadn't taken off as though she might still need to run. She walked to the table and set a thick manila envelope in front of Elise without looking at Damien. Every offshore account, she said, her voice thin and cracked at the edges. Every written instruction he gave me. Every transfer confirmation. She finally looked at Damien, and the look on her face was not defiance. It was the raw, hollow expression of a woman who had done something she couldn't undo and had decided that the only direction left was forward. I'm sorry, I should have come sooner. Damien's composure fractured. Claire, don't. Her voice broke on the word. Just don't, Damien. Then Margot walked in behind Claire and set her phone on the table screen up a recorded audio file already queued. Julian stared at the phone, then at his father. Something in his face went through a series of violent internal changes. Grief, rage, the particular devastation of a person watching a foundation they built their entire life on reveal itself as sand. You said 50-50, Julian said, his voice low and shaking. You told me we'd split everything. That was the deal. Damien's jaw worked. Nothing came out. I found your private account, Dad. Julian's voice cracked open, completely raw and furious and crumbling all at once. The one with nothing in my name. Not a single dollar. He put both fists flat on the table and leaned forward. You were never going to give me anything, were you? I helped you. I stood at that door, and I let them take my mother, and I told myself it was temporary, and you were going to... His voice dissolved. His chin dropped to his chest, and his shoulders shook once hard. Damien stared at his son. His mouth opened, closed. I'll tell you everything, Julian said to Elise without lifting his head. Everything I know. All of it. Damien stood up slowly. He straightened his jacket. He looked around the room with the measured survey of a man calculating exits, and then his eyes landed on me across the table. This isn't over, Nolan, he said, and he walked out. Julian called me 40 minutes after Damien walked out of the boardroom. He called from a number I didn't recognize, a burner, I realized later, which told me he had been preparing for the possibility of this conversation even before today. When I picked up, the first thing I heard was not his voice, but Margot's in the background saying, Julian, please, with the particular exhausted desperation of a woman who had been saying please for a very long time. Then Julian, he took Isabel. The words hit me like cold water to the face. When, an hour ago, maybe less. His voice was coming apart at the seams, shaking high, stripped of every layer of composure he'd built over 31 years of learning to perform calm. Margot picked her up from school, but she wasn't there. The school said a man matching Damien's description signed her out at noon. Noon? Nolan, he planned this before the meeting even started. Margot's voice in the background dissolved into crying. Not quiet crying. The kind that came from a place beyond control. Julian, I kept my voice level, even as my chest clenched like a fist. Has he contacted you? He texted me 20 minutes ago. A sharp, broken inhale. He said if I don't retract my statement to the board and tell them I fabricated everything, he'll take Isabel. Somewhere nobody will find her. His voice cracked completely. She's 9 years old. She has nothing to do with any of this. Julian, listen to me right now. I was already standing, already moving toward the door. Where is he? A pause. I heard Julian pulling himself back from the edge by sheer force of will, the way men did when they had no choice. North Pier, he texted the address. He said to come alone. He said that because he knows you won't be alone. I grabbed my coat. Don't do anything. Don't call anyone else. I'm calling you back in 3 minutes. Hugo Bennett answered before the first ring finished. I gave him the location, the situation, in 11 words that ended the conversation. I need you there, but I need you outside first. Then I called Celeste. She picked up on the second ring, and before I could speak, she said, I already know. Ethan called me. Her voice was steady, the steadiness of a woman who had spent 14 months in a basement learning to be steady. I'm coming with you. Celeste, don't. Her voice went fierce, the fierceness of someone who had been a victim for too long and was finished with it. He has never seen me standing upright and breathing since the night he put me in that room. You have no idea what that will do to him. Take me. I thought about it for exactly 4 seconds. Then, Marcus picks you up in 10 minutes. North Pier at 9 p.m. was colder than it had been in January, a hard February cold that came off the water with teeth. Hugo Bennett's team was positioned at 3 points around the building perimeter, plainclothes instructed to hold until my signal. 2 FBI financial crimes agents were parked 1 block north, paperwork already filed, warrants already signed. Ethan, Marcus, and I went in through the east door. The building was different at night, with purpose inside it. The dark felt occupied, the silence pressurized. We moved through the service corridor and up to the main level toward the stage. Damien was standing center stage. The only light was a work lamp he'd set on the floor, harsh directional, throwing sharp shadows up the walls of the ruined theater. Isabel was sitting on the stage steps to his right, her small knees pulled to her chest, her face tear-streaked and rigid with the frightened dignity of a child who has been told to be brave and is trying with everything she has. When she saw me, her whole face broke open. Uncle Nolan, hey, sweetheart. I kept walking forward, kept my voice warm and even. It's okay. I've got you. Damien stepped slightly between us, not blocking positioning. Just you and me, Nolan. That's all I wanted. Then let Isabel go to Marcus. I nodded toward Marcus, who had stopped 10 feet back. She doesn't need to hear this. Damien looked at Isabel, and for a fraction of a second something moved across his face that might once have been a grandfather's feeling. Then he nodded at her. Go. Isabel launched herself off the steps and ran to Marcus, who caught her and folded her against his chest and turned away from the stage without a word. Damien and I faced each other in the work lamp's harsh light. You always were the patient one, he said. His voice was almost admiring. I'll give you that, Nolan. I genuinely will. It's over, Damien. Is it? He spread his hands, the gesture of a reasonable man making a reasonable point. Your sister is alive, yes, but half the assets are already offshore. You can lock me up and still spend 10 years in litigation, trying to recover what I've already moved. Rachel already traced the Nassau account, I said. The master account. Every transfer, every routing number, every beneficial owner. The reversals were filed this morning. I held his gaze. It's done. Something shifted in his face, the first genuine crack in the composure. Then it hardened over. This company should have been mine, he said, and the warmth was entirely gone now, leaving something cold and old underneath. I built half of what Mercer Holdings is. Your sister kept me out of the ownership structure for 15 years. Your father kept me out before that. I gave this company everything, and I was always the one holding the door while the Mercers walked through it. So you locked her underground for 14 months, I said. His jaw tightened. I didn't plan for it to go that long. How long did you plan for it to go? He didn't answer. And in the silence from the wings of the stage to my left, footsteps slow, deliberate, unhurried. Celeste walked into the light. She was thinner than she'd been before her hair, still growing back to what it had been, but she walked with her spine straight and her chin level and her eyes fixed on Damien with an expression that I had seen once before, the day she had walked into a courtroom to testify against a business partner who had stolen from the company 20 years ago. Absolute quiet, devastating composure. Damien stared at her. All the color left his face. His mouth opened. What came out was barely sound. A broken, involuntary exhale, the noise a man made when the thing he had convinced himself was handled, walked back into the room, alive. Hello, Damien, Celeste said. You... His voice failed him completely. His hand came up, not threatening, just lost the gesture of a man reaching for something to hold on to. You shouldn't be... Standing. Her voice was perfectly controlled, but beneath it ran a current of something that had been compressed for 427 days. Here, breathing, she took one more step forward. Say it. Say what you had planned. Say it in front of my brother. Damien's chest heaved. His composure was gone completely, finally, irretrievably. I just wanted what was owed to me. You locked me in a room for 427 days. Her voice cracked on the number, just on that, just on the precision of it, the way she had counted every single one. What were you going to do with Nolan after the transfer? Say it out loud. Damien looked at her. His throat worked. And then in a voice that had lost everything that had made it dangerous, he said, he wasn't supposed to survive the spring. From 3 directions simultaneously, flashlights and footsteps, Hugo Carver's voice, carrying across the ruined theater. Damien Cross, keep your hands where I can see them. Damien didn't run. He looked at me one long final look, the look of a man who had played the longest game of his life and lost. And then he held out his wrists. From the water side of the building, a second team's radio crackled. Vivian Mercer detained at the pier. She was boarding a vessel. Celeste exhaled a long, shaking breath that she'd been holding, it seemed, for over a year. I put my arm around my sister, and she leaned into me and pressed her face against my shoulder. And finally, she wept. 6 weeks later, the sugar maple in the side yard of the Greenwich house was showing the first pale green of early March. I stood at the kitchen window with a coffee mug and watched a robin work the thawed ground near the stone wall, and I thought, this is the first morning in 4 months that I have woken up, and not immediately needed to be somewhere urgent. The thought sat in me strangely, not peaceful yet, not quite, but something adjacent to it. The particular quiet of a battle that was genuinely over. The legal aftermath moved, the way legal things moved, not fast, but with a momentum that couldn't be reversed. Damien Cross was indicted on 9 counts, including kidnapping conspiracy to commit fraud and criminal conspiracy to commit murder. Vivian faced 6 counts of her own. Adrian Pike was arrested at a motel in Newark 3 days after North Pier, still carrying a phone with enough text records on it to keep 3 prosecutors occupied for a year. Gregory Shaw surrendered his bar license before the disciplinary board could take it. Claire Holloway became a government witness and gave testimony so thorough that the prosecution described it as the clearest financial conspiracy record they had seen in 20 years of cases. Julian was indicted on 4 counts, but his cooperation was so complete and his testimony so central that his attorney was already in preliminary discussions about a sentencing recommendation that wouldn't end his life entirely. Margot was granted temporary sole custody of Isabel at the first hearing. She called me the afternoon the judge signed the order, and she was crying so hard she could barely speak. Great gulping sobs of pure relief that she'd been holding in since December, and I sat in my car in a parking garage and let her cry for as long as she needed without telling her to stop. On a Thursday in late February, I went back to the Greenwich house for the last time to collect my personal belongings. Vivian's things had already been removed by her attorney. The house was very clean and very empty, and felt the way houses felt when they had been lived in by people who had stopped truly living together long before they stopped sharing an address. I walked the rooms slowly. The kitchen where I had eaten 1,000 breakfasts without noticing the person across the table. The study where a steel pen had listened to everything I said and relayed it to a man who wanted me dead by April. The front hallway with its expensive wallpaper that Vivian and I had chosen together on a Saturday afternoon in our first year here, arguing pleasantly about whether ivory or cream was warmer in northern light. I stopped in front of the wedding photograph. It hung where it had always hung. Silver framed the 2 of us on the church steps 22 years ago. She was laughing at something I'd said seconds before the shutter clicked. I looked happy in a way I hadn't thought about in years. Unguarded, completely. Present, a man who believed completely in the moment he was standing in. I lifted the frame off the wall, held it in both hands for a long moment, looking at those 2 people who had no idea what was coming. Then I set it face down on the hall table. Not broken, not thrown, just set down. Some things you don't destroy, I thought. You just stop looking at them. I signed the divorce papers that afternoon in Evelyn's office alone, no one to witness but the notary. When I set the pen down after the last signature, Evelyn slid a second document across the desk. The final beneficial ownership declaration, the restructured trust, Mercer Holdings restored to its proper foundation. I signed that too, and that signature felt nothing like the first one. Celeste came back to Mercer Holdings on a Wednesday in early March. She walked in through the main lobby, not the service entrance, not a side door, but straight through the glass front doors on Fifth Avenue. And when the lobby staff saw her, 3 people started crying before she'd reached the elevator bank. She patted arms and said calm, dry things, and accepted every hug with the particular grace of a woman who had learned in a very concrete way not to take physical contact for granted. In the boardroom, she sat back down in her chair the one she'd occupied for 23 years, and she signed the board, minutes with her name in her slightly left-leaning handwriting, and then she looked across the table at me, and her eyes went bright and wet, and she pressed her lips together hard and nodded once. I nodded back. On a Saturday morning, Celeste came to the house before I finished moving out. We sat on the back step in the thin March sunshine with coffee, and for a while neither of us needed to say anything at all. The good kind of quiet, the kind that came from being known completely. Then Celeste said, "You saved me twice." "The first time barely counts," I said. "The day Dad wanted to sell the company." She turned to look at me. "You said no. You said we built it and we'd keep it. If you'd said yes that day, there would have been nothing worth saving and nothing worth stealing." Her voice softened. "So?" "Twice." I looked at my coffee cup. My throat ached in the way it did when something true was being said about you. Celeste stood up, went inside, and came back with a small box. Inside a key. "My office safe," she said. "Behind the Hopper print. You promised you'd wait." I looked at the key, then at her. "Open it," she said simply. In her office, I took the Hopper print down. The safe was small, the door worn at the edges. The key turned smoothly, well-maintained, frequently used. Inside a folder, thick the cover worn at the corners. Celeste's handwriting on the front. Damien wasn't the first one to try to take this company. This started before him, before he was even in the picture. When I wrote, "Don't trust the first one who reaches for the company," I meant the first one who reached after I was gone. But there's an older wound underneath it, and I think you already know who. I opened the folder. The first page, a wire transfer record dated March 14th, 2009, 14 years ago, before Damien had married into the family, before any of this had names. The name on the authorization line was one I recognized immediately, the signature unmistakable, the hand familiar, in the way that only a signature you had seen on important documents your entire professional life could be familiar. I sat down in Celeste's chair. The March light came through the window and lay across the folder in my hands, and the building was quiet around me, and I thought about Sophie Bennett saying, "She said it happened once before Damien was even in the picture," and I thought about the patience this had required, and I thought about how long some betrayals had been growing before anyone thought to look for them. I closed the folder, stood up, walked back out to where Celeste was waiting on the step with her coffee. She looked at my face when I came out, read whatever was on it with the precision she'd always had. "Now you know," she said quietly. "Now I know." I sat back down beside her. The robin was back near the stone wall, working the ground with patient, purposeful attention. "How long have you known—" "Long enough," she said. "I needed you to find it yourself." We sat with that for a moment, the weight of it, the particular grief of a truth that made sense of too many other things. Then Celeste picked up her coffee, looked out at the garden, and said, "Well, what do we do now, Nolan?" I looked at the folder in my hands, at my sister sitting beside me in the March light alive, drinking coffee, asking me what came next. "The same thing we always do," I said, and I meant it. People ask me sometimes, after everything, after the boardroom and the basement and the divorce papers, whether I regret being patient, whether I wish I had screamed, sooner fought louder, burned it all down the moment I heard Vivian's voice through that hallway door. My answer is always the same. No. Rage is honest, but rage is also blind, and I needed to see clearly. Here's what I know now that I didn't know before. Greed doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive wearing a villain's face. It arrives wearing a smile you recognize in the voice of someone who knows how you take your coffee, who sits across from you at dinner and asks about your day while quietly dismantling everything you built. The most dangerous betrayals in your life will almost certainly come from inside the house. I'm not a perfect man. I spent 22 years so focused on building something that I forgot to look at who was standing beside me. If I could give you one piece of advice, don't do what I did. Don't wait until someone hands you a letter from a sister who had to disappear to get your attention. Look at the people around you now, while there's still time to choose better. I believe God put certain moments in your path not to break you, but to show you what you're actually made of. That basement at North Pier didn't just give me back my sister. It gave me back myself. If this story stayed with you, if any part of it felt true, drop a comment below and tell me which moment hit you hardest. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is your sign. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means more than you know. And a gentle heads up. The stories coming next contain some fictional elements crafted purely to illuminate truths worth thinking about. If that's not your kind of content, no hard feelings, step away and find what speaks to you. But if you're staying, I'll see you in the next one.